There's a specific moment that happens in certain relationships where the man creates a test he doesn't know he's creating. He pulls away, not in the usual way where you eventually figure out how to reach him, but in a way that feels like abandonment. He goes silent, he stops trying. He watches to see what you'll do when the relationship stops being maintained by your effort alone. He's waiting for you to break. He doesn't know that's what he's doing. He's telling himself he needs space, or he's overwhelmed, or he's working through some internal thing. But deep down, beneath the justifications, he's running an experiment. He's testing the ceiling of how much distance you can tolerate before you collapse back into him, desperate and diminished, finally willing to accept whatever scraps of attention he throws your way. Every avoidant man has this moment. It's the point where he's created enough space that he's confident you'll eventually crack. He's seen women do it 1,000 times. They hold out for a while, then something breaks inside them. They reach out. They apologize for nothing. They reconfigure themselves to fit into whatever small box he's created for them in his life. He's waiting for that moment. He's already writing the ending where you break first, but you didn't. And what happened next is not what he expected. What happened next is not what you expected either. What happened next is the thing that changes everything. Not just about the relationship, but about who you are inside it. Let's start with what he was actually testing for. An avoidant man doesn't retreat just to hurt you, though that's often the effect. He retreats because, on some very deep level, he's terrified of what happens if he stays present. Presence means vulnerability. Presence means you could hurt him. Presence means he might discover that he actually cares about someone enough to be devastated if they leave. That's the terror underneath everything. So he creates distance. And then he watches to see if you'll do what everyone else has done. Will you eventually give up and disappear, thus validating his fear that relationships are unsafe? Or will you cling tighter, thus validating his fear that closeness is suffocating? Either way, the distance he creates becomes evidence that his fear was justified. But there's a third option that most people never reach. There's the option where you don't disappear and you don't cling. You just keep existing. You keep having your life. You keep being stable and intact and present in a way that doesn't require his constant validation. And that third option terrifies him more than either of the first two because it proves his fear wrong. It proves that you're not leaving because he pushed you away. It proves that you don't need him to complete you. It proves that the thing he's been running from his entire life, real presence, real choice, real intimacy, might actually be possible. But you don't know any of this when you're in it. When you're in the waiting, you just know that he's gone. Not physically, maybe, but emotionally, he's somewhere else entirely, and you're left standing in the space where connection used to be, wondering if you're the problem. Most women break right here. This is the moment where the internal questioning becomes unbearable. Did I do something wrong? Am I not enough? Should I reach out? Should I try harder? Should I give him more space? The uncertainty becomes so excruciating that doing something, anything, feels better than doing nothing. So they text, they call, they show up with explanations or apologies or pleas for clarification. They do the thing he was waiting for. They break. And the second they do, something shifts in him. The anxiety releases. He was testing you and you failed the test, and now he can retreat further because he has proof that you're the clingy one, the needy one, the one whose desperation made him pull away in the first place. But you didn't break. So here's what actually happened inside him as the days stretched on and you didn't reach out. The first week, he felt relief. He told himself this is what he needed: space, freedom from the constant pull toward connection. He could breathe. He could be alone in his apartment or with his friends without the weight of managing someone else's expectations. He was right about needing distance. Distance is good, distance is safe, but by week 2, something started to shift. He noticed he was checking your social media, not in an obvious way, just casually scrolling past, but he was aware of how his attention landed on your stories. He was noticing if you were out with friends. He was noticing if you seemed happy or sad or indifferent. He was monitoring, and he didn't fully understand why, because in his mind, he was the one who needed space. So your life should be irrelevant to him, except it wasn't. And the more you didn't reach out, the more your irrelevance to him started to feel like a lie he was telling himself. Because if you're truly irrelevant, you don't find yourself thinking about her randomly. You don't find yourself wondering what she's doing. You don't find yourself experiencing a small jolt of something, not quite pain, not quite relief, when you see that she's living her life without you. Week 3 is when the story he was telling himself started to crack more noticeably. He began constructing narratives to explain the silence. She must have moved on. She must be with someone else. She must have decided he wasn't worth the effort. And these narratives should have been comforting. If she's moved on, then he was right to pull back. If she's with someone else, then his fear was justified. If she decided he wasn't worth it, then at least he doesn't have to carry the guilt of being the one who pulled away first. But the narratives didn't comfort him. They started to do something else. They started to make him feel untethered. Because what he was discovering was that he doesn't want to be irrelevant to you. He doesn't want to be easily replaced. He doesn't want to have created the distance that led to you moving on, even though moving on is exactly what he was testing to see if you would do. He's caught in a contradiction, and it's starting to break something open in him. By week 4, there was no more pretense. Not with himself, anyway. He thought about you regularly. Not the version of you he was rejecting, but the version he realized he'd been pushing away. The version that didn't perform anxiety for him. The version that just existed, intact and whole, regardless of his distance. The version of you that didn't break. That's when he started to do something you probably didn't see. He tested the waters, a text about something trivial, a meme, a message that had nothing to do with the relationship, but everything to do with seeing if you'd respond, if the door was still open, if you'd softened in his absence and become pliable again. And when you responded warmly, but without collapsing, something shifted. Because your warmth without desperation told him something he'd never learned before. It told him that you were fine without him. And you also didn't mind having him around. That's a completely different dynamic than what he'd been operating in before. In his previous relationships, the choice was binary. Women either clung to him, which made him retreat, or they eventually let go, which made him feel victorious but hollow. You were something else. You were someone who didn't need to control him through either pursuing or abandoning. You were just present, and he had no framework for that. So when you responded, something in him made the connection between his absence and what it had cost him. Not in an intellectual way, in a felt way, in the part of him that experiences loss, not as proof that distance is necessary, but as proof that distance has a price. But here's the thing that's more important than what happened to him. Here's the thing that actually matters. Something happened to you while you were holding that line. You didn't just prove something to him. You proved something to yourself. You proved that you could survive being distant from someone you love without disappearing. You proved that his absence didn't make you less than. You proved that you didn't need to perform desperation to be worthy of being chosen. And every single day you didn't break, you were rewiring something fundamental about how you understand your own worth. The first few days were the hardest, probably. The anxiety was probably loudest. The questions about whether you should reach out, whether you were playing games, whether staying silent was cruel or strong, those questions were probably deafening. But then something happened. Somewhere around day 7 or day 10 or day 14, you stopped waiting for him to validate your choice to stay silent. You stopped needing his eventual return to prove that you'd done the right thing. You stopped performing patience and started actually living. That's when everything changed. Because the moment you stopped needing his response to feel like yourself, you became someone different. You became someone who could have him in your life or not, and be fundamentally okay either way. And that version of you is not someone he can dismiss. That version of you is not someone he can wound with his distance. That version of you is someone he has to actually show up for. I want you to understand something about what happens after a man realizes you didn't break, after he realizes that his test failed because you simply refused to fail it. If he's capable of any growth at all, the first thing he experiences is shame. Not the defensive shame that makes him angry, but the quiet shame that comes from understanding that his distance hurt someone and that someone didn't deserve it, that someone kept living, that someone found a way to be whole without him completing her. This shame is important because it's the thing that breaks the cycle. It's the thing that makes him question his pattern instead of defend it. It's the thing that makes him consider the possibility that maybe his fear isn't a sound guide for how to love. The second thing he experiences is something that feels like longing, but it's different from his usual longing. His usual longing is tied to control. He wants her back under his terms, where he's the one who decides how much closeness is acceptable. But this new longing is tied to respect. He's longing for someone who didn't perform for him, who didn't diminish herself, who didn't beg. He's longing for someone who loved him without needing him to reciprocate in the way he was comfortable reciprocating. And that's a different kind of person than he's used to being attracted to. But he is attracted to her. He's attracted to her refusal to break. What typically happens next depends on whether he does any work on himself. If he comes back and he's actually ready to be different, it shows up as a shift in how he approaches you. He doesn't expect you to meet him halfway. He doesn't expect you to be grateful that he's finally paying attention. He shows up, he initiates, he tolerates his own discomfort with closeness instead of making it your problem. And this is crucial. He doesn't need you to explain or forgive or process the distance with him. He just needs you to see that something's changed. And you'll see it because actions are louder than words. And his actions will tell you whether he did the work or he's just testing a new approach. But there's something else that happens during this time. Something that most people don't talk about. Something that happened to you. You changed too. You're not the same person who was holding the line 2 months ago. You're not the person who was white-knuckling through the uncertainty, praying that your silence would eventually bring him back. You're someone who knows now that her worth isn't contingent on his return. You're someone who learned to sit in pain without needing to escape it through someone else's reassurance. That person is stronger. That person is different. And that person doesn't need him the way she used to. She can want him without needing him. And that changes the entire dynamic of the relationship. Because need is what creates vulnerability to manipulation. Need is what keeps people small. Need is what makes us willing to accept less than we deserve. But want without need, that's different. That's powerful. That's the foundation of a real partnership rather than a survival strategy disguised as love. So when he comes back, if he's capable of it, he's coming back to a different woman than the one he left. He's not coming back to someone he can reassure into compliance. He's not coming back to someone who will spend the rest of the relationship trying to prove she's worth staying for. He's coming back to someone who's already proven it to herself. And that changes everything about how he has to show up. He can't be absent anymore and expect you to adjust. He can't retreat and expect you to chase. He can't create distance and expect you to diminish yourself trying to close it. Because you've already learned that you can survive his distance. You've already learned that distance doesn't define your worth. So now if he wants you, he has to actually be present. That's what everything changed means. It doesn't necessarily mean the relationship is fixed. It doesn't mean there's a happy ending where he becomes the perfect partner and you live in harmony. It means the entire structure of how you relate to each other has shifted. It means you're no longer negotiating for crumbs. It means you're no longer performing in hopes of being chosen. It means you're choosing to, actively, every day. And that's only sustainable if he's actually showing up. Now, I want to address the version of this story that people don't like to talk about, because not every man comes back. Not every man realizes what he's lost. Some men are so defended, so committed to their fear of closeness, that no amount of your refusal to break will teach them anything. Some men will keep going, finding other women, testing them, waiting for them to break, and moving on when they don't. Some men will eventually find someone who does break, and he'll stay with her in a low-level partnership where she's always trying to earn his presence, and he's always rationing it. If you find yourself with a man like that, the version of you that didn't break didn't waste that strength. That strength goes with you. That knowledge that you can survive his distance goes with you. That proof that you're whole without him goes with you. And the version of you that walks away from a man who isn't willing to show up is not the loser in that scenario. She's the winner. Because she gets to keep the things she built while he was pulling away. She gets to keep her life, her friends, her work, her sense of self. She gets to keep the person she became while she was holding the line. And that person doesn't need a man to complete her story. That person is already complete. But whether he comes back or whether he never does, the most important thing that changed is you. You learned something about yourself that most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid learning. You learned that you can be hurt and keep going. You learned that you can be abandoned and not disappear. You learned that you can love someone and not lose yourself in the process. That's not a small thing. That's the thing that changes every relationship you'll ever have for the rest of your life. Because once you know you can do this, once you know you can hold your own line, tolerate your own pain, and keep existing in your own wholeness, you become someone who's no longer willing to negotiate for basic respect. You become someone who can walk away from situations that don't serve her, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. You become someone who knows her own worth. And that version of you doesn't make excuses for people anymore. That version of you doesn't shrink herself. That version of you doesn't wait for permission to take up space. That version of you is not breakable. So when people ask you if the silence worked, if he came back, if the relationship was saved, I want you to know that those are the wrong questions. The right question is whether you saved yourself. And the answer to that is yes, you did. Every day you didn't break, you were saving yourself. Every day you chose yourself over the comfort of his attention, you were building something that would last longer than any relationship with him ever could. So hold on to that. Hold on to who you became while you were waiting. Because that person is the whole point. Not him coming back, not the relationship being fixed, but you realizing that you were never broken to begin with, and you didn't need him to become whole. You just needed to stay still long enough to remember it.